Let's move on to President Zelensky and his visit to Washington, surprise visit that happened. The news broke on Wednesday, which Counterpoints brought to all of you. He ended up arriving on Thursday around 2 p.m. at the White House. Two important public appearances where he spoke. The first was in the White House in the East Room at a joint press conference where he faced questions from two American political journalists, of which asked very interesting questions around what type of weapons Zelensky still wants, the relationship between the two, whether peace could still be negotiated. Let's take a listen to that.
I don't know what just peace is. It's a very philosophical description. If there is a just war, there can't be any just peace in the war that was imposed on us by these, I don't know how to describe that because we are in the White House and I can't find the proper language. So these inhumans, I would say.
And President Zelensky, you have made it clear that he is open to pursuing, well, let me put it this way. He's not open, but you're open to pursuing peace. You're open to pursuing a just peace.
What's going to happen after Patriots are installed? After that, we will send another signal to President Biden that we would like to get more Patriots.
That is our life. We are in war. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. That is my appreciation.
How the U.S. calculated the escalatory effect of sending a Patriot missile battery to Ukraine.
I did not discuss that at all with the president, but we do not. It's a defensive system. It's a defensive weapon system. It's not escalatory. It's defensive, and it's easy to and we'd love to not have to have them use it. Just stop the attacks.
That was a very interesting exchange because what you saw there was that President Biden actually had to jump in and clean up President Zelensky's comments when he was asked specifically about a, quote, just peace. Zelensky said a just peace essentially was not possible, spoke of the need for vengeance, reparations, and actually tried to even box Biden in with the 10-point peace plan, which effectively, means the total expulsion of Russia from all Ukrainian territory, including Crimea. That's right. It is a complete non-starter. So there was actually, for all the display of unity, I watched the entire thing. There were several moments where President Biden actually had to jump in and either clean up President Zelensky. The third question, which you guys saw there, was actually the reporter asking, when are you going to give Ukraine everything that it needs? And President Biden preempted it and just goes, his answer is yes. And then goes, here's my answer. And Zelensky just goes, I agree. Clearly, though, in that, and as you saw during that exchange, he was asking for more Patriot missiles, and he continued to elucidate on it whenever he gave his joint session address to Congress. So that's do you want to jump in?
Yeah, let me just, a couple comments about that. To me, this was maybe the most clear-cut example of signs of disunity and also a sort of little bit of a peek into what some of the conversation behind closed doors might have ultimately been. That's the piece I'm almost more interested in than what was said publicly. Right. Because part of the advantage of having someone face-to-face and being able to have potentially a one-on-one meeting with him in the Oval Office is, you might be a little bit nervous doing like some sort of remote call, even though obviously they take all precautions to make them secure, that someone may be listening in on the other end. If you are face-to-face with someone in the Oval Office, you can really get into the nitty-gritty of, okay, where are the real red lines? What is the public posture versus what is the real position? Here's how far we're willing to go. Here's where our population is. Here's where I'm going to apply pressure to get you to go back and negotiate. Those are the pieces that I'm really interested in. So to me, this moment was a tiny, tiny glimpse of some of the more difficult discussions that were likely happening behind closed door. And the other one thing I want to note about that press conference, which was relatively abbreviated, they just took a handful of questions. But every question was a hawkish question. Like the one you just said, the reporter was just like, listen, you said at one point that you weren't going to do a Patriot missile defense system, and now you are. So why don't you just cut to the chase and give him everything that he wants? And, the reality is there actually is an inconsistency in what Biden is saying, because he, on the one hand, is saying, we'll do whatever we can. We're behind you 100%. We'll give you everything you need to be successful on the battlefield. But we are also holding things back, and in my opinion, for very good reason, to try to avoid World War III. And so that kind of distance between those two, the real position and the stated position, was a constant source of kind of a little bit underlying tension throughout
It also bears explanation as to why the Patriots were not sent in the first place in the early days of the war, which is there's a direct acknowledgement by U.S. officials that the Ukrainians don't know how to use a Patriot defense missile system, and if we did, we would have to send U.S. soldiers on the ground. And so actually the administration has yet to answer a direct question as to whether U.S. troops will be deployed into eastern Ukraine in order to operate these Patriot missile defense systems, or if the Patriots, they will be somehow trained on it. If that's the case, these will not be available on the battlefield for months on end. This is a very highly sophisticated system which you can't just simply deploy and use within a matter of days. And unfortunately, President Zelensky continues to push that. It was one of the key elements of his speech before Congress. Much of it, which, you know, was kind of nice to finally hear, was thank you to the American people for bankrolling this war, especially because Congress is poised to send another $45 billion. I'm doing a monologue on that, bringing our total to more than $100 billion in aid within a single year. But he pushed in that speech for additional Abrams tanks directly supplied from the United States, along with F-16s. Let's take a listen to that portion of his speech.
Can perfectly operate American tanks and planes themselves.
That was the key moment from President Zelensky's speech. It was only about a 22-minute address or so within the chamber. Much of it was, filled with, thank yous to the American people, delivering a battle flag.
Parallels.
Yeah, parallels between the U.S. Battle of Saratoga and the U.S. Battle of the Bulge. But finally, that was the major policy ask of the entire speech, asking directly for U.S. Abrams tanks for U.S. F-16. So if we can bring the visit together, there are three things which Zelensky sought to get out of this. It wasn't just the Patriot missiles. He knew that was getting him. What we have here, and let's go and throw the next one up there on the screen, A4. Number one is he wants longer range missiles that are capable of striking deep inside of Russia, so-called ATACMS. These are something that the administration has refused point blank in order to give President Zelensky. 2, he wants those Abrams tanks. 3, he wants the F-16s. 4, I guess, is even more Patriot missile defense systems than what we're already giving here. So this was not simply a thank you address by President Zelensky. This was really a shopping trip on his behalf for his military as it's stuck in the middle of this Christmas winter battle before the fighting season opens up in March. And of course, the Russians relentlessly were shelling and bombing all of Ukraine while he was here in the United States. Ukraine, Kyiv specifically, remains completely blacked out at all hours of the day, on and off as they work to restore power. But their energy infrastructure is in a very tough bind. There are reports of people in hospitals having to do like amputations and heart surgeries, literally off of a generator, or in some cases with no electricity at all. And I mean, it's like 20 degrees in Kyiv right now, 20 degrees Fahrenheit. It's a brutal winter, as I've said before. For 4 months out of the year, the average temperature, the highest temp on average is like 35 degrees. So this is not a joke what the Ukrainian people are going through right now, hence why he's here trying to get as much as he wants. And of course, all of this comes right now, actually this morning, Krystal, very likely that the Congress of the United States will pass that $1.7 trillion spending bill, of which includes $45 extra billion to Ukraine. But clear here in his remarks that Zelensky's message is it's not enough. We need even more than that right now.
He outright said that.
Yeah.
At one point, he said, quote, "We have artillery. Yes, thank you. Is it enough? Honestly, not really." So, I mean, it was sort of like, thank you for what you've done, but also pony up. I need a lot more. I understand where he's coming from, but it also was quite bold, to be totally honest with you, quite bold and consistent with, remember there was that report over the summer that Biden actually got really frustrated with him and actually kind of yelled at him on the phone because they had just given him some big aid package, and then immediately Zelensky is on the phone like, I need more, I need more, I need more. Again, I understand where he's coming from as people are at war. The speech was very much tailored. He has gone to great lengths whenever he has spoken to, leaders of other nations and congressional bodies in other countries, legislative bodies in other countries. He has gone to great lengths to sort of tie the Ukrainian struggle into whatever their sort of previous national historical struggles are. So to make these historical connections. So, he talked about American independence, talked about World War II. All of that was sort of expected. He also really situated it in terms of a sort of global fight for freedom and democracy. So you're not just giving us cash, you're investing in global democracy. And he also threw in there, some shots at Iran for people who are like very anti-Iran and sort of hawkish on that to try to win them over as well. And some of the other context here is this is, in some ways, a really good moment for Ukraine because they have been succeeding on the battlefield. They've done far better than anyone had thought. They've really come a long way. They're in strong position. Russia is really struggling, and all of that is the case. But at the same time, you have the brutal winter set in right now, as Saagar is talking about. Zelensky talked about people celebrating Christmas by candlelight, not because it's romantic, but because they have no power. So the toll of war, which has long been, very harsh on Ukrainians, is really harsh across the entire country. Speculation that Patriot missile defense system will actually be used to protect some of that energy infrastructure to try to keep the lights and the heat on for as many people as they possibly can. So that's the, Ukrainian domestic situation. You also have, of course, in the U.S., Republicans set to take control of the House. And Kevin McCarthy, who is very likely to be the next speaker, saying that, it's no longer going to be a blank check. Now, I think ultimately the Republicans are mostly going to fall in line with whatever the Biden and the Democrats ultimately want. But there's probably a little bit more nervousness on Zelensky's part that, hey, I got to get these people on board and make sure that I can continue to get these outflows that I've been getting from the United States. And then you also have the Europeans enduring a difficult winter with very high energy prices. And polls both in Europe and here in the U.S. indicating that, people are still very much with the Ukrainian cause, but some of that support has softened and the level of prioritization has certainly softened. So that's sort of the backdrop and the context and why Zelensky decided now was the time to leave Ukraine for the first time since the war started and come to the U.S. And of course, as Saagar is going to lay out very explicitly in his monologue, which has been overwhelmingly, of course, the biggest backer and benefactor and has really enabled the Ukrainians to get to where they are at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's just no question about it. Their military, he basically even said it. It's true. And one of the journalists even said, he's like, without America, he's like, my family would be dead and my country would be gone. It's actually true. I would like to hear that a little bit more often from their side, despite other calls just for even more and more. But I think it's an important acknowledgement at the very least. At the same time, though, in terms of the geopolitical picture, European support for the way things are going right now, and I'm not talking about the UK, more about France and Germany, it's a very different situation. Let's throw this up there on the screen. At the very same time that President Zelensky is visiting Washington, Emmanuel Macron actually is calling on Europe to reduce the reliance on U.S. for security and specifically to provide some sort of security guarantees to Russia. This was a huge pushback from the Ukrainians and even from the UK and from the United States. But essentially what he said, Krystal, is that, look, for this war to come to an end, we are going to have to provide some sort of security guarantee to Putin so that he does not feel as if he will get invaded. Now, that was met with tremendous outcry from the Ukrainians and from the UK and the US, mostly because they're the most hawkish and they don't want to provide any sort of security guarantee. But you see a much more and a different clear-eyed view from Macron as to what an actual negotiated settlement is going to look like. A negotiated settlement is one in which Russia feels secure and it no longer is going to continue its military operation against Ukraine, and Ukraine feels secure and it no longer feels as if it's going to get invaded or be waged war upon by Russia. Right now, those two poles are very, very far apart, but Macron is being chided in the West for stating the obvious. Macron, if you look at this, is very interesting. He even says mostly about the United States. He's like, look, the point is that by mortgaging all of our defense costs and socializing them to the U.S., we now no longer have nearly as much say over our own European security affairs, of which I would say, congratulations, Mr. President. Now, though, you should ship a lot more weapons to Ukraine so we don't have to send as much, and then you can have much more say over what's happening, considering it's on your continent in the first place. So there's a big split in the transatlantic alliance right now.
This has been the case basically since the beginning of this war, and even before the war. I mean, Macron was the most aggressive in keeping lines of dialogue open directly with Putin and trying to negotiate. He and Germany have long been more in favor of diplomacy and talks. There's been this kind of divide between the US and UK and France and Germany. So he's attempting to assert himself here a bit more. Let me read you the quote exactly because I think it's very interesting. He says, "Peaceful times will require talks, first and foremost for guarantees for Ukraine for its territorial integrity and its long-term security, but also for Russia, as it will be party to an armistice or peace treaty." He also went on to say, "Whoever reproaches me for asserting myself on this topic should then explain to me what they propose. What the people who refuse to prepare and work on this are proposing is total war, a total war that will involve the whole continent." So, I mean, it's pretty striking comments from Emmanuel Macron.
Yeah, absolutely. He's been consistent there since day one. And I do believe that given the change, first of all, why is Congress passing this $45 billion? It's because they know that it's very likely to be the last one. Zelensky actually made a lot of appeals here. He's like, I understand bicameral, bipartisan support is necessary to us. But we also need to consider that things are changing here. Our domestic populace's want to continue giving a blank check to Ukraine is well below 50% now at this point. It was at some 90% at the very beginning of the war. On top of that, how are the Russians responding? As much as the Russian economy is a disaster, as much as they have been humiliated on the battlefield, Russia is not backing down in any way. They've been shelling the hell out of Ukraine, including with missiles now for a long time. And actually, in response to Zelensky's visit, let's put this up there on the screen, which is they are now announcing a 30% increase in the entire size of their armed forces, bringing their standing army to 1.5 million combat personnel from 1.15 million, in addition to a $15 billion increase in their annual military budget. So whatever remaining money that they have left, they are throwing it straight into the military. No sign of backing down whatsoever. Their new commander is very much dedicated to going attacking the center of gravity, which is the Ukrainians' will to resist, as in taking down the energy infrastructure of the entire country. And if you see any sort of combined offensive in the winter or after the winter, it's going to entail probably a much more brutal campaign than even what we saw in some of these liberated cities. So we're in for, I think, a tough winter, both for the Ukrainians and also in terms of the geopolitical situation. Things are changing fast. Remember, it's only been 300 days. We should always try and put things in the context of history. Imagine trying to guess the outlook of World War II. 300 days into the war. Yes. You'd be like, oh, Hitler's gonna win. France and Germany are gone. The entire phony war. And Norway. It's like you can convince yourself of a lot of things. All the way up until 1917, the Germans thought, and probably correctly, that they were gonna win the First World War. So things can turn on a dime. These things take a long time. So go back to the Civil War. I can tell you the same thing. The point is that nobody knows where things are headed. All we see is a rocky future ahead of us.
I talked to our friend Yegor about the domestic political situation in Russia, and a couple things that he suggested to me. One is, and there was some talk from the Kremlin about this, there's kind of an expectation there may be another draft. They recognize they need to increase their armed forces yet again. And, in some ways, the conscription process the last time around was kind of a disaster for them. On the other hand, it's not like there's been a mass revolt that has brought down the regime. So, they have some level of complacency and, support among a good portion of the Russian public. The other piece, though, that he pointed out to me is just like here, you have people who are high-placed and influential in Russian society who are making a lot of bank off of this war. And that creates a perpetuating process of its own, a dynamic that we are very familiar with here as well. So keep in mind some of those background factors going on in Russia from the domestic political situation as well. Hey guys, ready or not, 2024 is fully upon us now. And Saagar and I have been brainstorming ways that we can really up our game for this critical election.
Yeah, we rely on our premium subs to expand our coverage, to add staff, to upgrade the studio. We just want to give you the best independent coverage of this election, which is possible. So if you can help us out, become a premium subscriber today, breakingpoints.com, or the link is down here in the description video. It really means the world to us. And if you like what we're all about, this is the best possible way to keep us 100% independent, working only for you.